Let's start. Welcome to the Ask Phil Skinny podcast with a guest. I'm proud to present Paul Salter. Paul, welcome to the show. Please tell us more about yourself. What is your story?
Of course. Well, thank you for having me, Peter. It's a pleasure to be here. And I am a high performance hypnotherapist and mindset coach. And what I do is work specifically with CEOs, founders, high level executives, ambitious professionals who feel stuck. They understand what to do to get to that next level of success or to sustain their current level of success, but they're having immense difficulty acting on that knowledge, constantly getting in their own way, sabotaging behaviors, limiting beliefs, and deep fears holding them back. And the primary way that I approach these challenges is through hypnosis, which I'm sure may come up later in the discussion. But my journey is quite unique, Peter. I've been coaching for 17 years. The first chapter of my coaching career was actually as a sports dietitian or a sports nutritionist, working very closely at the university, professional, and Olympic level, helping these high level athletes maximize their performance, maximize their body composition. And what was so fascinating to me during that time was that here are incredibly talented athletic individuals getting paid millions of dollars to play their respective sport that they play, and they knew what they needed to be doing. Yet, just like you and me, who are not high level professional athletes, they too struggled. They knew what to do, but they weren't doing it. There were fears, beliefs, habits that were getting in the way of that execution they needed. So I took that awareness, and as I left the athletic realm, I spent the next 10 years primarily working with men and women who were stuck in the yo yo dieting cycle, constantly losing and regaining the same 20 to 50 pounds over and over again. And my approach to helping these men and women was to prioritize helping them lose the limiting beliefs and the emotional baggage that held them back from stepping into the identity of someone who could successfully and healthily maintain that weight loss they achieved, as well as the joy, the confidence, and accomplishment that came with it. Now, here's where things get a little interesting. After about 10 years in that space, I made a strong pivot. I started playing poker professionally. And at the time, the first 6 months or so, I thought I was doing everything possible to have as much success as I could. I was studying, I was working, I hired the coaches, but it still felt like I was lighting money on fire. And not quite ready to give up, I asked for help. I hired my own mindset and performance coach who happened to be a credentialed hypnotherapist. And in a very short amount of time, I suddenly found myself playing at much higher stakes, earning much more money than I thought possible. More important, however, was the impact she had on me as an individual, helping me confront and overcome, let go of my limiting beliefs, my poor relationship with money, some of the fears and worries and anxieties I had. And the impact our relationship had on me was so profound. I walked away from poker. I knew that hypnosis was the next evolution of my coaching journey. So I got my credential as a hypnotherapist. I let go and walked away from all of the nutrition work I was still doing. I surrounded myself with as many mentors as I could to learn as much as possible, and I haven't looked back since.
Amazing story. And I have so many questions. I believe our listeners would like to know them. So, on our podcast, we talk primarily about burnout and midlife
Mm.
crisis. And so your career reads as let's say, a perfect, you have a perfect curriculum of one success after another. You said that you had some setback as a professional poker player, but with the good coach, you could overcome that. What we mentioned just a bit before we started recording is that burnout is almost impossible to avoid. Would you say that burnout is necessary in order to understand our limits, physical limits, and emotional limits?
I think that's well said. If you're listening right now and you would categorize yourself as a high performer, someone who is constantly looking to improve, to do more, grow more, leave a bigger impact, have a bigger income. Well, in order to really stand out from the average population, and the reason this is important is because, at least here in America, average means overweight, unhealthy, broke, stressed, and anxious.
Mhm.
Yet it's like society has all of these invisible currents trying to hold you back to keep you average. So in order to break free from that and stand out and have next level success, you need to have a strong tenacity, ambition, work ethic, and intensity about you. And that intensity is necessary to achieve transformational success. The problem that so many high performers run into that leads to burnout is they do not learn how to recalibrate that intensity. They're always on, they're always going. And at first, again, it's needed to have that first ascension to the next rung of success. But as that success comes, so does more visibility, more opportunity, maybe more income, impact, whatever it is you desire. So, at the expense of self care, time with your significant other, time with your children, time decompressing, resting, recharging, you do more and more and more. And society, in many ways, celebrates that. But internally, that friction begins to occur. That undercurrent of anxiety that's always present, that difficulty sleeping, feeling exhausted, but unable to turn off, your mind moving a million miles an hour. So, bringing it back to your question, that level of burnout is quite common because intensity is necessary to achieve
Mhm.
next level success. The opportunity then there is to do the work internally to first and foremost detach your self worth, your self esteem from your results. You're not your results. You're still a great person, whether you have poor results or great results. And then, two, to learn to create a sense of safety, slowing down, resting, playing, disconnecting from work.
Amazing. I have so many questions I wanted to ask. So, you mentioned calibration of intensity. Is that
Yeah.
something that we can learn on our own? Or would you say that a coach or a mentor is it's a must in this area?
You can learn it on your own. Obviously, look, I'm a coach, I'm biased, I have many coaches. I'm a big believer that asking for help accelerates results. So if you're truly committed to a goal, not just interested, but committed, coaching is the fast track to get there because you, just like me, have so many blind spots that you are unable to recognize and therefore unable to tackle, address, and let go. And that's one of the many benefits a coach can bring into the equation is identifying those blind spots, those sneaky forms of sabotage that you're unaware of that are really holding you back, keeping you stuck in that pattern of burnout like behavior.
Would you say that people that have some history with sport, either on high school level or university later on, are better with coaches? And I don't mean just sports coaches, but the life coaches and performance coaches. Would you say that they're more or they it's easier for them to admit they need help?
I think so because they've already hopefully tasted the value and benefit of having a coach, a mentor at that level, whether a team or individual sport. I'll also say, and this is more of a general observation and a bit of a stereotype, but I think everyone listening will agree. More often than not, men struggle to ask for help. Vulnerability is seen as a weakness. So many men are quite stubborn and they take the route of thinking and hoping they can figure it all out by themselves. And typically that leads to thinking the only answer is more work, more time, more energy, more effort. And more often than not, that's what is fast tracking their path to burnout, rock bottom, whatever you want to call it, before they recognize I need help.
Would you say that being above average or above average successful is somehow or often connected with hyperindependence, and that this hyperindependence um, is limiting or is making harder for people to ask for help?
That's a great question. I mean, that independent drive, that autonomy, just like the tenacity and ambition we talked about earlier, it can be a superpower. If you are someone, there's a great quote that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. So if we pause there, because there's a second part to that quote, but if we pause with that first part, if you are hyper independent and you require no support or communication or decision making process with others, you can go really fast. You can go really far. But if you really want to sustain that success, if you want to go further and go fast, that's when you need to bring in help. And that's when you need to understand the power of automating, delegating, eliminating, editing some of the responsibilities. Because, truth be told, as you continue to have more success, there will be more tasks and to dos that need to be executed, the vast majority of which are out of your wheelhouse, your zone of genius. Other people are going to be much more effective and efficient at them, and they're not the best use of your time.
So independence is good, but too much independence makes things much heavier.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's that calibration again.
yeah, but um, would you say that independence is also one of the main, let's say, reasons for burnout? Or and how would you um, how would you suggest that our listeners go about it? Because a lot of time independence is basically just a trauma response, and shaking it out or shaking it off, getting out of this trauma response can be really hard. And I believe that is the number one reason why people struggle to ask for help, assistance, or even outsource things.
Yeah, if you're unwilling to ask for help, it just means you're taking on more responsibility, more pressure, more expectation. Therefore, you have to do more, do more, do more. And in order to achieve your goals, it just means more input without ever taking any time to rest, reset, disconnect, or recharge. So it is quite difficult because really what I've observed is the core belief that facilitates that hyper independence is a lack of trust in other people. And I know I can give you an example. I had a client of mine. He is the CEO of a company and he's involved in about five other companies. And as the CEO, he's had to learn to delegate, but there were multiple periods in his life where he would be doing group projects, even dating back to elementary school. And, he'd be in a group project and his home environment conditioned him like it was A's or nothing. His report cards had to be A's. There was this perfectionistic mentality instilled with him at a young age. Otherwise, there were consequences from his father. So there were multiple moments that came to mind where he'd be involved in a group project and the other kids didn't show the same level of interest or commitment to completing the task. They wanted to goof off, mess around. And he always felt like the burden of work fell back on him. And because he was so wired for perfection and doing well because there were consequences at home, he started to be the one that just did the work himself. He'd do the entire team project by himself because he didn't trust other people. He didn't feel other people could keep up with that same drive, tenacity, and commitment. Well, then we fast forward decades later, that same problem is still plaguing him. One of his early businesses failed because he struggled to delegate. He struggled to ask for help. And eventually he ran himself and his partners into the ground. The business crumbled and he had to learn some hard lessons in order to start fresh and do it again.
Amazing. And this is a huge opener for my next topic. And that is what are the benefits of the burnout? Because everyone is just talking what are the setbacks of the burnout, and it's dangerous. It has consequences for the health. It has consequences for our well being, for our relationships,
Mhm.
for our uh, abundance or money. What are the benefits? What do we get from the burnout? What are the lessons that we can take from the burnout?
Well, I don't want to recommend anybody specifically go intentionally trying to burn themselves out. But what I recommend instead, and I'll hopefully clearly answer your question, is there needs to be pre-calculated periods of intensity. Just like a 100-meter sprinter preparing for the Olympics, they don't just sprint and train as hard as they can for 4 years to go run that race. There's periods of high intensity and there's periods of rest, low intensity. And it's very scientific, and that's a whole nother discussion, but there's intentionality in their training. And we can learn a lot as high performing entrepreneurs and professionals about the impact of that approach. There might be seasons, there might be months or weeks where the workload is much more demanding, and we can control different variables, optimizing sleep, stress response, and putting less on our plate during those periods of peak intensity. And then the other times when intensity isn't required, we focus on consistency. We focus on consistently executing those fundamental self care behaviors that help optimize our energy, health, and well being. With those periods of burnout, though, they're phenomenal learning lessons. There's a simple kind of cliche quote out there: in order to expand, you have to expand. So it's during these periods of intensity, you are intentionally stretching yourself. And the benefit becomes you learn just how capable you are. Again, that's not something that should be forever, because your body will inevitably rebel very, very, very intentionally. But at the same time, if you're the more you push yourself in this intentional endeavor, the more aware you become of some of your own unique red flags, warning signs, and signals that you're on the verge of burnout. And you can learn to calibrate with that new data and information to take a more sustainable approach.
Thank you. So there are
Yeah.
benefits. Even if it's not recommended, there are benefits. Before we finish, I would like your take on what's the number one advice how to go about life and business uh, in order to be sustainable, healthy, happy, and abundant.
You have to always prioritize focusing on the fundamentals. And the fundamentals look a little different for everybody, but in general, it's everything under that umbrella of both self care and family or loved ones. So, under the self care umbrella, one step down further, we have exercise, we have, diet, sleep, stress management, and then we have prioritizing significant time or time with our significant other, our children, our close friends, community, and social life. Most high performers who go out on their own, or they become entrepreneurs and owners, or they take these very high opportunistic high income jobs, they do so because they claim they want more time, more freedom to spend with the people they love most, to take care of themselves, but they neglect those two things most importantly early on, and they wonder why they reach a point of burnout so quickly. So in order to never lose sight of your fundamentals, your calendar is a great reflection of what's important to you, what's a priority. So rather than planning your family time and your self care around your work, you need to flip it. Your calendar should begin every week by planning when you're going to the gym, when you're waking and sleeping, when you have date night with your significant other, time with your children. Then you can start planning your weekly meetings, your calls, emails, admin work, whatever it may be.
Thank you, Paul. These are great insights. Before we finish,
Yeah.
where can our listeners get in touch with you?
Yeah, thank you for asking. If you enjoyed what it is, Peter and I discussed, I have my own podcast. It's called the Unstuck High Performer Podcast. It's on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. And then also TikTok, Instagram, YouTube at the Paul Salter are three great places to connect with me as well.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for all these insights.
Thank you, Peter.